Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the Indiana Brightfields webinar series. Today, we are on our third series of solar procurement. Before we get started today, I wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit of housekeeping items here on our Zoom call. Next slide, please. If you experience technical difficulties with your connection, we have a number on the screen as well as an email. Please dial 785-352-0783. And please note this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the website. A link to this website as well as the web page will be provided in the chat box. Next slide, please. There are many ways to join or to provide chat or questions. We will be taking those throughout the call, or you can wait to the end of our open office session at the end of this webinar. We will have about an hour and 10 minutes of presentations today, and we will have about 30 minutes set up for open office times afterwards. Before we get into KSU tab, I just wanted to at least highlight, we're doing this today just to highlight the different communities in Indiana. We're increasingly looking to reactivate their brownfields and also diversify energy. So looking into combining those uses into one, about Brightfields, turning our landfills into solar fields is something that we're looking to talk about today. Our first webinar we went through October 1st, Brightfields 101, was more of an introduction, an overview of the Brownfields and Brightfields program. If you attended October 22nd, we talked about our permitting and approval process for getting landfills evaluated and ready for solar. And today, we're really excited to talk about solar procurement. Before we hand it over to Rocky Mountain Institute, I wanted to at least give KSU Tab and Beth Grigsby a little bit of time to talk about their services. So Beth?
Hey, thank you, John. Hopefully I can move if we have sticky slides today, bear in mind, it's all my fault. So just letting the audience know ahead of time. I'm Beth Grigsby. I'm with the Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. We are from Kansas State University, nationally funded. We provide technical assistance for communities and tribes revitalizing their communities through brownfields redevelopment. Our services are free and designed to meet specific needs. Oops, I'll go back a little bit. It's a national program funded by the US EPA. And today, these are the services that we can provide at no charge to your community. And we can bring in very talented partners such as RMI. That's really been the backbone for our 3 webinars here. But it has taken a great partnership with IU, Environmental Resilience Institute, with the Indiana Brownfields program, with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and of course RMI. But I want to thank them again for providing so much material for Indiana residents. And we want to hear your feedback, and we really need feedback so we can design programs in the future that meet your needs. So please, we'll send you reminders, but if you could fill out the evaluation form, use the link that's in the slide, or you can also scan the QR code. And that sends me off to Tansy with RMI.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tansy Massey Green. I'm a senior associate at RMI, or the Rocky Mountain Institute. I presented on our first webinar. You might remember me, but today we're going to be diving into solar procurement, which is our expertise at RMI. And here's just a refresher of the webinars that we've already done. We had that Brightfields 101 in the beginning of October. And then IDEM and Indiana Brownfields led us through liability and permitting. And here we are at solar procurement. And in the last 15 to 30 minutes of each webinar, including this one, we have office hours with all the technical assistance partners that are involved in this space in the state. So please stick around for that period so that you can ask some of your site-specific questions. Today, we're going to start off with a quick background of RMI. We'll then get into the types of solar deal contracts. We'll talk about preparing for site reuse with solar, and then we'll do some Q&A with all of our panelists from the series and talk about the next steps. Today's objectives, one is to understand different types of deal structures for solar projects in Indiana, and two, how to prepare for site reuse with solar, including procurement, planning, and utility engagement. Starting off with our first objective, first let me go over some ground rules. So first of all, please be present, close your other apps, email and messaging, except for Zoom, as if we were in person. Ask your questions so we can all learn from each other, and be prepared for the poll questions on the screen, even if your camera's off. We'll have quite a few poll questions. Be aware, keep yourself muted during presentations and when others are speaking, and create space for others to contribute. And finally, embrace a learning environment. This is an introductory to energy topics for many participants. And I'll note that this is not a sales environment. So if any of you are coming from the private sector, please do not post any sales messages. This is not the space for it. It's a learning environment. RMI is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating a prosperous, clean energy future for all. We were founded over 40 years ago, and we work across the US and in 60 countries. We combine research, whole systems thinking, and unconventional partnerships to help communities advance sustainable energy systems. We partner with KSU TAB to help communities across America reuse brownfield sites with clean energy. Our goals are, one, to educate community site owners and state agencies on clean energy brownfields reuse options through different types of workshops and presentations. Two, to provide technical assistance to communities and site owners to vet sites and market feasibility. We talked a little bit about this in the first webinar, but really this is helping communities understand if their sites are viable for solar. And three, we help communities develop procurement documents, help them with their funding strategies, financing models, provide market guidance, and we support with other resources. So some of our technical assistance that's available, we can help communities identify your most promising opportunity. This will look like sites, pre-screening, supporting with funding and financing guidance, and finally, accelerating Brightfields procurement. And that's what we're going to get into today. We help communities figure out what the structure of their project could look like and how to approach a developer. As a quick reminder, Brightfields reuse previously disturbed, often contaminated land to reactivate sites and support a local energy transition. Here we have a couple of photos of brownfields, which I know you all are probably familiar with. This is where a property where the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. And a Brightfield is really just when it's a property where the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse, it's a type of redevelopment where the renewable energy, typically solar, is built on the former brownfield or Superfund site. We think it's a clever name to call it Brightfield, and so that's the going term for it in this series and in all of our work. And they come in all shapes and sizes. Here we have a solar project, a Brightfield solar project on a dump in Vermont. Up here we have a landfill solar project in Annapolis. And here in Buffalo, New York is a combined solar and wind project on a former brownfield site. So there's certainly good examples around the country of these projects. And we're trying to increase the number across the country, and definitely in Indiana, where we know there's a lot of potential. And I'll note that RMI, we're not a developer, we're just a nonprofit hoping to help communities realize these projects. Like I said, we're funded by KSU. And so, when we support communities with these projects, we're not getting any revenue from it. We're really just funded to do the work from KSU to reactivate these sites. And so when we're thinking about if their site has potential for solar, we're thinking about if this is a good strategic reuse for the site. Is it a productive reuse for the site? Does it Does this reactivate a site without current plans? And does this risk impeding future reuses nearby? Is this the highest and best use of the site? Does it align with the existing site owner goals and community visioning? And then we'll also look at a site from a technical reuse perspective. Does the site seem like it can reasonably support clean energy? The types of questions we asked, and we went over this in the first webinar, but questions like what type of technology could make sense? Solar, wind, something else? Are there concerns for shading? Or are there wetlands or floodplains? Is there infrastructure nearby that may complement the clean energy reuse? These are some of the questions we ask. And then, of course, is there an economically feasible pathway for how the electricity generated would be consumed? And that question is what we're going to get into today. So starting off with the different types of solar deal structures, I'll just start by saying that this topic can get very in the weeds very quickly. We tried to keep it, we tried to provide enough detail so that you really have an understanding of how these projects can be structured. But I will say, if there's a structure that you think could work that's not represented on these slides, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work. It just means it can get pretty complicated, but these projects can work many different ways, and you can really get creative with how these projects are set up. To responsibly advance a project, understanding the site and the deal structure options is critical. So first, you're going to want to understand the site conditions, the history, and feasibility for the site, which is those pre-screened, those questions that I just presented on figuring out if your site could potentially support clean energy. And then you'll want to understand the potential ownership and electricity offtake options, and I'll explain what offtake means in just a sec. You'll then want to engage your utility if it's necessary, and we'll talk about when it is or when it isn't necessary in a bit. And then you'll want to engage with the market or identify a developer to actually build the project, if that is necessary as well. To make a clear strategic ask from the Brightfields market, site owners need to figure out how the project will be structured. A developer can eventually help with some project aspects, but it's important to have a working hypothesis before procurement. And so at RMI, we're helping communities figure out what a viable structure could be, so that when you do go to the market, when you are looking for a developer, they have something to work with, and they know that you're serious about the project, and that there could be a working structure that would provide a reasonable path for the energy to go. And so before we get really into that, what that all means, let's go over a couple key terms. First off, energy off-taker. This is the end user or consumer of the electricity produced from a project. Next term, watt is how much energy something uses or generates per second. For example, an average LED light bulb requires 10 watts. A kilowatt is the measure of power equal to 1,000 watts. And usually these projects are measured in kilowatts. A megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, and larger projects are typically measured in megawatts. And a kilowatt hour is a measure of energy which is equal to 1,000 watts being used or generated in 1 hour. You typically pay for the number of kilowatt hours consumed monthly for your electric bill. And I just want to make sure we really understand the point of energy off-taker, that first term, before we move on. Basically, every electricity project needs to have someone or some operation purchasing and using the power. And so, if there's a large solar project, the utility would be buying the power and adding it to the grid in some instances. In other instances, you might have a solar project that connects directly to another facility, and they're going to be the off-taker. But we're gonna get way more into what that means. For a project to be viable, the electricity produced needs to be sold to a consumer or a utility either on site or through the electricity grid. Two primary offtake options exist. So here we have our solar project, and the first offtake option is what we call behind the meter. This is when an entity on or near the site directly consumes the electricity generated. The off-taker can be the same as the owner of the project, or it can be another entity. The next type of structure is front of meter. This is when the electricity flows through the utility's grid and is consumed elsewhere on the grid. So here you have the electricity going into the utility's grid, and then it could go to households or businesses, anything that's going to consume electricity from the grid. The offtake options available may vary by site, proximity to existing end users, and utility service territory in Indiana. So for behind the meter, the only option is going to be on-site energy use. So this is when there's a facility near the production of electricity that's going to be using that electricity. Front of meter, which is when it's connecting to the grid, it can either go to just the general utility grid supply, or it could go to through a sleeved power or green tariff program. And we'll talk about the specifics of each of these in a sec. So if you don't know what sleeved power means, that's okay right now. I'm going to now pass it off to my colleague, Jacob Becker, who's going to get into the specifics of behind the meter and front of meter.
Cool. Thank you, Tansy. She's not kidding about in a second. We're going to get literally right into all those definitions. So I just want to start with on-site solar, also called behind the meter solar. And this is solar that can be cited in multiple ways, but essentially you're designing it to meet the power needs of a specific facility that is on or near the site of generation. So you start off with an on-site solar generation system. The typical ways you see this are going to be either rooftop, a parking canopy, or a ground mount, and that includes landfill solar as well. You're then going to pass that energy onto an on-site energy use. So this can be anything that's on location or near the location of the generation that you're going to provide solar for. So for example, if you're just a regular house and you install solar panels on your house to power your fridge, this is an example of on-site power use. From there, you might not be able to meet all the on-site load, even though you're directly powering a specific facility. So you're generally still going to be connected to the grid and buy the difference in power needed from the utility, just like you would normally. So this is offsetting some of your general electricity need with on-site generation. So on-site generation is generally optimal when the size and timing of generation are matched with the end use. And a simpler way of saying that is that on-site power is most useful when you're able to exactly match what you're trying to power to some degree with what you're powering it with. So for example, needing something that's powered on when the sun is up. A major benefit is you can save a lot of money with on-site generation by not requiring the same amount of infrastructure and fees that you would if you're connecting to the grid normally. It wouldn't require the use of the utility distribution transmission system, for examples, which are limiting factors for some of the other options, as you need the utility approval there. And if the on-site use is already grid connected, Brightfields can decrease the total amount of electricity needed to be bought from the grid, meaning that you don't need to power everything with on-site use. You're simply decreasing the amount of electricity you need to buy from the grid. It comes with some additional challenges, though. First of which being if you use more electricity, or if you create more electricity rather on-site than is used locally, you're still going to need to find something to do with that excess generation, often connecting it to the grid and selling it to utility, or you'll need to resize the system to be smaller than the on-site use you're trying to match. And additionally, on-site power, as I mentioned, works best if the power matches when you're creating it. So in the case of solar, for example, daylight hours, unless you're pairing it with battery storage. A good example of this is in Dayton, Ohio, municipalities used adjacent brownfields to power some of their municipal operations with solar. They're able to reduce their energy costs by doing this. So this project offsets 38% of their annual consumption from an energy-intensive municipal facility, in this case, a water treatment plant. And the on-site generation is coming from a 16-acre brownfield site that's adjacent to the water treatment plant. The city optimized the siting to maximize the savings, and they did this by sizing it in a way that would optimize how they're able to match the on-site use that they're trying to use. And they negotiated it with their utility, AES Ohio, and were able to waive some of their interconnection fees because of the sizing. Currently, the project is expected to start construction in early 2026 and be completed by the end of the year. And again, this is an example of that on-site use, which is going to save them generation. So now we'll move into a quick poll question on on-site use that should pop up for everyone, which is, do you have a site in mind that has nearby energy demand? I'll give everyone a chance to answer that. Cool. I'm seeing a good mix of options of some people needing more information, some people being pretty sure they have a site, and some people being pretty sure they don't have a site in mind. So keep in mind the technical assistance that KSU can provide could be helpful here, or that RMI could provide in helping figure out some of the uncertainty there. And also always happy to answer questions about it at the end when we get to questions to see if probably not going to get into site specifics, but some of the more general questions on whether sites are proper for behind the meter solar. Cool. Moving on, we're going to go to the other type, front of meter, which is, as Tansy went over, this is solar that can be provided to the grid rather than going necessarily for an on-site use. And that's why they're called off-site off-takers, because you're using electricity at a different site than you're generating it on. So these come in a few more flavors. Just trying to get the slides go. There we go. So the first one that we're going to cover is direct utility ownership. I also want to mention there's a few variations on this as you're going through, but I'm going to present one of the general structures that you might see with it. But the exact ownership can vary a bit depending on how it's set up. But generally, you're going to see direct utility ownership of a solar site if the site is large enough or economically competitive enough that the utility is interested in directly owning the generation. Generally, the main factor in this is how big a site is. So here you're going to have the site owner leasing the land for the solar project to the utility, and the utility will provide funds to do that. The utility will then be the one to operate solar on the site, which will then sell the energy elsewhere on the grid. And similar to how you pay your electric bill at home, some energy buyer, aka any utility customer, will have this solar as part of the grid mix that they're going to see in part of their normal bill. So this is an example where the utility is basically using whatever site you have or whatever site the site owner has as just a general power plant, which is then providing a general energy mix that's just going into their whole portfolio of generation. So a couple variations in this could be there are different owners or leasers of the land besides the utility, but generally you're going to see something that looks like this if you're looking at something where the utility is more directly involved. And the utility will be involved in all of these, but that's where they're more directly involved in the actual operation of the power plant. Another example of in front of the meter is the green power purchasing programs, which are also known as sleeved power or indirect power. So if you hear any of these terms, they're referring to this general structure. These are utility programs that can enable customers that are specifically interested in purchasing renewable energy to purchase it, but it may come at a premium price, which is why you might see it in sites that are smaller than the direct utility ownership. So here again, you're having a site owner with a site that's viable for solar, that's leasing the land to whatever solar facility is being created. In this case, energy developer is the most likely person to be developing on the site. The developer then is going to deliver that electricity from the solar facility to the utility. And the utility will then do what's called sleeving it, which is why it's called sleeved power, to a dedicated energy buyer. This energy buyer could be anything from a county, a city, Indiana University, a corporation that'll pay a negotiated fixed rate for that renewable energy. So while they're not directly having wires gone from the site to the energy buyers, you can see it goes through the utility system. The energy buyer is in a way funding the development of this site. And this is especially useful when the energy buyer is interested, for example, in funding brownfield solar or renewable energy, as they're able to take part in the creation of this project. So they're still going to be paying for the electricity through the utility, and they'll be paying for the specific site in terms of whatever the utility has decided this is valued for them. And these projects come with different requirements, which we'll go over some of them on the next slide. So a few Indiana utilities offer these sort of green power purchasing programs, but they all have different requirements, sometimes different fees, as well as restrictions. So going over them all pretty quickly, Duke Energy Indiana has their Green Source Advantage program, where the off-taker is able to directly negotiate the rate with the developer, and compensation is based on the value of the power in the energy market. Also may come with additional fees as well to Duke Energy. AES Indiana has their cogeneration small power production program, which is limited to systems smaller than 80 megawatts. Compensation is again based on the electricity production and the installed capacity. Or sorry, instead is based on the electricity production and installed capacity. NIPSCO has their excess distributed generation tariff, which is capped at smaller systems of 1 megawatt, but they have a set compensation rate at 1.25% of the market priced power at the wholesale rate. And there are many municipalities and REMCs throughout the state. These programs are going to vary. So if you know that you're in a utility district that's not one of the large IOUs and you're curious about it, IOUs being the investor-owned utilities that the top three are, it's worth working with your utility to either see if they're willing to set up a program or see what programs they may have on offer. But there are too many of those for us to cover all of in this slide. So an example of this with third-party ownership is the Belmont Wastewater Treatment Plant, which shows how municipalities can benefit from a third-party ownership project. Here they had a 20-year lease for the developer to own and operate a project on Citizen Energy Group's property. They give nominal lease payments to the land to Citizens Energy Group. The developer is the one who paid for the project, the labor, the interconnection, the operation, and maintenance. And this project is likely used as part of the AES Indiana's Sleeved Power program, which is one of those green power purchasing programs. This project is fully energized and activated as of 2015. So I think I'm going to pass it back to Tansy to go over a summary of all these methods.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So most methods here will require a utility to approve interconnecting the site to the broader grid. For on-site behind the meter use, the requirements are enough you must have enough demand on or near the site to make project costs effective and worthwhile. The pros here are that this does not require an interested third-party utility or grid interconnection, which can save money. But the cons are that the system must be sized to the demand. If the project is owned by the municipality, it requires the upfront investment. Of course, the system can be sized larger than the nearby demand, but then it would require that grid interconnection and some sort of utility engagement. The direct utility ownership option, it requires an interested utility. The pros are that this is a pretty straightforward one and done deal. If the utility is interested, the utility could play the role of, or they could hire the developer to do the work. But the cons here, it requires grid interconnection, and usually utilities are really only interested in pretty large sites. So this is going to be very dependent on if your utility is interested or not. And if they're not, there's no deal there. If they are, then it's an easier one for the municipality. The other one, the green power purchasing program, or the sleeved power, there's a lot of different terms going around for meaning the same thing. The requirements there are that an interested third party and utility program must be in place for this type of structure to work. The pros are that an entity with clean energy goals may be willing to subsidize the project, and a developer can finance the project. And what I mean by this is that you know, if a large tech company, let's say with renewable energy goals, is interested in the power on your site, they would be willing to pay for the power produced on the site, and the developer would be the one to finance the project because they would be building it and they would be selling the power to that entity. The cons are that the project requires grid interconnection and it may come with additional utility fees. In some of the projects we're working on in Indiana, utilities require annual fees to participate in these type of sleeved programs. All right, we're going to launch the third poll question here. Just kind of a setback to see how we're all doing. That was a lot. Let's check in now on how we're doing. Let's see if you get the gist, if you're an expert. Aren't there other structures that we didn't cover? I'm following this, but it's a lot to digest, or you lost me. Maybe that's actually all. All right, it seems like a good number of folks get the gist, which is awesome. And for some of you, it's a lot to digest. And some of you are already experts. Let's stop the poll and I'll keep going here. Indiana solar market is growing, but has fewer electricity offtake options than its neighbors in Illinois and Ohio. So here's an overview of the projects going on, the solar industry in Indiana. There's quite a few jobs, and it's actually 16th in terms of capacity of solar in the state. So it's certainly an up and coming solar market. Although there's a few things to note, that there's certain structures that don't work, that aren't legal in Indiana, like they are in the neighboring states. For example, in Illinois, they have retail electric choice program. But power customers in Indiana cannot choose from whom they buy electricity in a competitive marketplace, unlike in Illinois. Also, community solar is not an option in Illinois. So power customers cannot subscribe to shares of large solar projects like they can in Illinois. And finally, community choice aggregation is also not an option, unlike it is in Ohio, where power customers can aggregate their electricity loads to purchase clean energy in bulk from the market. So there's definitely some limitations in Indiana, although this is a growing field and there are a growing industry, and there are certainly opportunities in the state. And if you answered in the poll, wait, aren't there some other structures that could work in Indiana? There certainly are. And like I said, we didn't list out all of the different options here in this slide deck. We kind of bucketed the main categories of how these structures are going to work into the categories that we went over. So quick checking knowledge here. Another poll to check how we're doing. You're a municipality and you own a site located 0.1 miles from your municipal wastewater treatment plant. There is a large university 5 miles from the site with renewable energy targets, and the site is located 1/4 mile from a substation. Which structures could you pursue? Select all that apply. And the options here are behind the meter, so that's the on-site option, front of meter with that sleeved power program, community solar, or a PPA. And we're asking here for which are available in Indiana. All right, let's go ahead and end this poll. The answers are actually just the first two: behind the meter for a wastewater treatment plant and front of meter for green tariff program. And that's because community solar and PPAs are actually not allowed in the state. We're going to keep moving on here. So if you answered the poll question earlier that you're lost, or this was a lot to digest, I want you to remember these 3 things. The first is, if your site is located next to your building or another entity's building with energy consumption needs, behind the meter is likely your best option. 2, green power purchasing or sleeved power is an option energy buyers and off-takers when there isn't on-site power demand, but it often comes at a premium. And number 3, if your site is large enough, the most straightforward option could be to offer the site to your utility for a program, offer the site to your utility for a project in exchange for lease payments for the site. And that's kind of what the structure, similar to what the structure was for that Belmont site. Quick pause for any questions so far. All right, seeing and hearing none, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Matthew Popkin to talk about preparing for site reuse with solar.
Thank you, Tansy, and thank you, Jacob. Hello, everyone. I don't think I have met this group yet through this webinar series. My name is Matthew Popkin. I lead and founded our RMI's Brightfields Accelerator. I also chair my city's Urban Renewal Authority in Colorado. So I've seen brownfield reuse projects in numerous different ways, not always for renewable energy, but also for certain economic reuse purposes. I'm really excited to walk through some of the prep for site reuse here with you all. With that, I wanted to note maybe 2 guiding thoughts as we transition from the deal contract structures to kind of site reuse with solar here. The first thing that I wanted to offer is you may have a site that works for solar, and so what we're trying to figure out is how do you plan for the reuse and engagement with the solar market. I think the guidance here that we're going to provide is more for public and municipal site owners. Private sector may have some different approaches in procurement or lack thereof needed for competitive procurement. So just keep that in mind if you are a private sector joining us, interested in trying to do this kind of reuse. You might have different purchasing options than what we focus on today. And then just another guiding thought for folks who have less experience in the energy market. This is very similar in some ways to an economic reuse for a brownfield. If you're building a business park on a brownfield, for instance, you're thinking about how do we fund the economic development and who are really the customers of this site and or the customers of the folks that would occupy that site, right? We're in the same way when you think about an energy project, you're thinking about who's ultimately going to be that offtake or that customer of this site or project. So it's a similar mindset to think about when you're approaching reuse, just some different caveats as both Jacob and Tansy walked through already. So just wanted to frame that up before we jump in. So in Indiana, there are typically 2 viable paths for getting your project to the market. Once you have a viable site or once you think you have a viable site, you're really thinking either direct ownership of the project, in which case you'd identify the energy buyer or the off-taker if you're the municipality, or you'd find a developer through a competitive procurement process. Or you go the route of having a utility or third-party ownership structure. In this case, you would start conversations with your utility once you thought you had a viable site to gauge that interest in using solar energy from the site. Most likely in this situation, you would be negotiating a site lease or a surface lease, depending on the type of site that you have, with the utility or with that third party for them to own and operate the project while you kind of maintain site ownership. That's typically how that works. So even for like a landfill project, what we've seen typically happen is a surface lease agreement where the surface of the landfill is leased for this kind of a purpose, not the rest of it, not the other environmental management or maintenance responsibilities. So direct ownership offers control of the project and helps offset municipal energy bills, but it does have its challenges. So some of the key benefits here, the municipality does maintain control of that project, or that public entity maintains control of that project. And you can use the electricity produced to offset your own electricity consumption. And that's the behind the meter topic that Jacob and Tansy presented on earlier. When we think about some challenges here, what we're talking about in this case is that it does require the municipality to run that procurement process or potentially develop a complex or novel process for some communities in partnership with the utility to set this up. And usually this requires an upfront investment and or financing to make this possible. There are some incentives out there currently still, though some are sunsetting in the next year or so. But there are ways to fund and finance these projects as well. When you go to procurement, if you are directly owning a project, it's important that you are it's important to remember that you're actually asking developers or prospective respondents to invest their time and resources to consider your site and to submit a proposal. And so when you're preparing for this, there's a lot of due diligence to make the market want to respond in a serious and favorable way here. So what does that mean? Well, the developer is going to consider a whole host of factors before deciding whether they want to spend their time and resources submitting a proposal, including the prospective economics of the project and factors that might influence project cost, including state and federal incentives available at the time or at the likely time when this would be constructed, the size of the project, which usually translates into economies of scale or lack thereof, the supply chain availability of some of the materials that might be needed and or certain purchasing requirements. If there are local labor laws that apply, if there are local purchasing laws that apply, if there are domestic or national requirements, as there often can be for solar project or renewable energy projects. And then what potential interconnection costs or engineering costs or design costs might factor into this too. In addition, and really importantly, the regulatory status of the site will help ensure compliance, but also help indicate complexity or lack thereof for the site. And then the interconnection to the energy demand or consumption location. In particular, we're talking about here the distance of interconnection or proximity to existing electrical infrastructure. A greater distance means more wires, more equipment, more effort, and potentially more land issues to navigate or access issues to navigate. Also, when we're thinking about direct ownership, it's important to work through as many project details as you can before bringing a developer on board and making sure to include all of that in an RFP to give developers a good sense of the project that they're working with. Saying, oh, I have a landfill, I want to put solar on it, doesn't quite get at all the nuances that might be useful for them to understand. So really we want to think about in this procurement here, what's the project overview? What are you trying to achieve? What are we looking at as a package? What's the scope of work? What are you expecting the developer to actually do? Maybe your team, for instance, can't do certain types of design work or engineering work that you're hoping that they can take on, but you do think otherwise it's competitive. Making that clear in the scope of work is important. Installer eligibility and their qualifications. Offering clear evaluation criteria. What is important to this owner of this project? What's important to you if you're going out to bid, and how are you going to evaluate it? Making sure that that is clear, whether it's clear is price the driving factor? Is sustainable land use and innovation a driving factor in this? Is the qualifications of the respondent or the developer particularly important here? These are multiple factors that you want to think about, and we often encourage offering weighted percentages for those, so it's very clear kind of the valuation that is truly being considered. Oops. And then specific proposal or project requirements as you work through this in terms of either local design or planning criteria, permitting requirements, expectations on timeline, schedule, all of that. What does this look like in more detail? So if we break down the project overview section in particular, what we're really trying to get at is what's the purpose and goal of this project? Are you just trying to reactivate a space that hasn't been used for the last 30 years? Are you truly trying to bring on electricity consumption because you have a need and you think that this can hedge against future electric rate increases? Whole host of different purposes and goals that you could be considering. What's the site details and history? This is absolutely critical, and I think anyone who's a brownfields professional or a brownfields professional adjacent here and understands the value of that. What's the status of the site? What kind of topography, details, assessments have been done? What was the past use? What was the regulatory status? What type of waste for landfills is buried underneath that surface, right? All of those details matter. Who the energy off-taker or off-takers are for this project, who's consuming that, make that clear up front. I should say on 1.3 here, ideally make that clear up front. There are some cases maybe for a front of meter project where you may not know, but the utility is, you're working with the utility to kind of sleeve that power through, and they'll find that buyer. Depends on that structure a little bit. But certainly if you were going to directly own and consume that electricity, make that clear that it would be behind the meter. Project partners or technical assistance advisors involved or that have been that are collaborating or funding this. So you're welcome to list if you're working on RFP, if our team has supported you in technical assistance, to say, hey, we've been looking at this with RMI and KSU's technical assistance to Brownfields program or their Brightfields accelerator, noting that that's showing that you're doing some more due diligence. If you have other local partners, for instance, who are providing funding or providing some donating some of the land or educational, want to fund educational pieces of this, note that as you go through as well. And then another key piece here is also to outline the timeline, work schedule, and expectations. So that gives these 5 pieces here give a clear expectation of what you want respondents to be prepared for. There are many other components that might fall into that project overview, and certainly when we get into scope of work type things in the future sections, that gets detailed quickly. When we think about direct ownership and procurement in general, it's important to keep in mind some green flags or things that will indicate to the market that this project is worth their time. So a few green flags here, and these are informed by some of our friends in the market. The site owner offers developers creativity and flexibility in project execution. How rigid you are might depend on how much flexibility that they think they have to kind of come up with a creative solution or design. Does the site owner identify a customer with strong credit to buy that power generated at the site? Typically, the market will look for MUSH customers. That's municipal, university, school, hospital customers. The procurement document clearly communicates the project priorities and goals. We've already talked through that. And then the site owner demonstrates evidence of collaboration with state or federal agencies and or knowledgeable technical assistance providers. Again, you do not have to do that, but often, and certainly when we're talking about Indiana here, you have on this very call, you have state regulatory agencies and state support agencies, as well as multiple technical assistance providers. So certainly can't hurt and only helps add credibility to your request. To be a Debbie Downer here are some red flags that we might be thinking about or signs that indicate that the project is not worth their time. So again, ideally you want to avoid these kinds of red flags where the site owner has a lack of understanding of the regulatory environment or the site conditions, and they want the developer to just kind of figure it all out on their own. Not particularly ideal. The RFP, request for proposal, is only focused on the site with no identified customer or prospective electricity buyer. Again, it's not always the case where you have to have all of those like fully, signed on the dotted line, but having a strong hypothesis as to who might be buying that electricity or consuming that will go a long way. In addition, the site owner sets up unrealistic expectations about the project costs or revenue generation. Know what you're getting into and make it clear there. And then the site owner expects developers to clean up contaminated sites. There is some site prep that often can go into this, or regrading, or some adjustments. If it's minimal site work, that can often be included in that scope of work. If this is a broader cleanup effort, highly recommend talking to IDEM and other state regulatory agencies who oversee cleanup, as well as thinking about cleanup as an independent phase for this project, or expect to pay a very different rate for your project if that's being bundled in. And bonus points here, if you can get a letter of support from your utility or from other key players or stakeholders in your RFP, showing that the developer can have more confidence and that you already have some buy-in for this project. Not going to go through too much of this in detail, but here an RFP or a request for proposals or pricing may be the right type of document, but there are RFQs, requests for qualifications, and RFIs, requests for information. That may be the best choice for some situations, especially if you're in the early stage trying to get a sense of where the market is for your community or your region. So the request for proposal specifically seeks pricing proposal through competitive procurement. It requires more advanced material and preparation and clear evaluation criteria for evaluation of your goals, as we talked about. The RFQ allows site owners to find a developer to partner with and refine some of those project details. It's maybe a softer but formal process there to pull on a partner. Though the process to evaluate proposal pricing might be a little bit more complex as you get down the road because you're not asking for pricing at this stage. And then a request for information. It's a low stakes tactic for sure for projects in their early stages to gauge kind of basic market interest. I would not expect, though, this to be a particularly deep response. So be prepared for a mixed or marginal level of response from the market that may not clearly reflect the market. Let's go ahead and launch poll question number 5 here. So please go ahead and select all those green flags for a procurement document. And as you're identifying, not all of these are green flags. Some of these are red flags or not ideal situations. Great. We'll go ahead and wrap this one up. There was a little bit of a tricky one there. Site owner expects number 1, creative freedom, yes. Number 4, procurement document clearly communicates those project goals and priorities. Yes, absolutely green flags. Site owner expects project to be behind the meter. I would generally say that that is a green flag because there is clarity on how this is going to be consumed, right? So that's really what's being articulated here is there is a clear sense of who that energy off-taker might be and that they're offering that directly in the RFP for how that's going to be structured. And if you're curious, I'll just share those results out there. Great. So wrapping up with just a few more notes here. So if you don't go with the direct ownership approach and you take more of a utility approach, that's a way to achieve site reuse without that upfront cost and with minimal administrative effort at the local level or at the site owner level. There are a few factors to keep in mind here, though. So the benefits of this is that the site owner doesn't pay the upfront costs of the project, and the site owner could receive some lease payments for site reuse. The challenges here, the site owner hands over control of the site in some ways, certainly over the project to the utility, and it may not be of interest for the utility installing solar on the site. So how and when you approach your utility to gauge their interest is going to depend on a lot of factors. The first factor is political context, previous relationship with your utility. How do you want to approach that? Are you building a new relationship, or are you building on a kind of a long-standing relationship and kind of understand their goals? Understand the type of utility that you're working with, municipal, co-op, IOU, investor-owned utility, that will matter. And certainly understand the utility's goals and plans and how this fits in will shape whether they might be interested in this type of an approach. One more set of poll questions here. And one thing I might add on the goals or plans, utilities across the country are trying to cope with kind of the rise of data centers and other high consumption facilities from an electricity and energy standpoint. So thinking about, hey, is your site something that you can offer to help make it easier for them to bring on electricity quickly to support those types of needs if that's happening in or near your community? So this is just this question here, just making sure you know who you're paying your electricity from. So I'm glad to see 100% of folks know who their electric utility is. Are you familiar with their long-term plans? Most are saying no. So it could be a good opportunity to kind of open that up and take a quick look there, or ask ChatGPT to help you out with that. And then has a solar project been built in your utility? Some folks don't know. Many people say yes. So things are happening. It's a question of, again, how, where, and how much. Go ahead and end that poll. And so just as a little bit of a refresher here for some folks, in terms of types of utilities in Indiana, what we're really thinking about here is investor-owned utility. That's typically a private utility there. Here are some of those folks that are operating in and around Indiana. Then you have cooperative utilities, and we got a few of those folks as well. And last but certainly not least, you got municipally owned utilities or municipal utilities or munis, depending on how cute you want to get with the name. So there are multiple types and examples of those types in Indiana. That means their plans, their structure, their political context all might vary. So how and when you approach your utility to gauge their interest in your project will depend on a few factors. I'll mostly just put these questions up here. I'm not going to walk through all of them at this point. We've talked about some of these already in concept. So just know that when you pull back the recording or pull up the slides, if you're thinking about how to start that conversation, you can figure out how do you want to approach this in terms of what's allowed, what are the long-term plans, what experience do they have with solar, and what types of surrounding infrastructure might exist to support this. So if there is interest from your utility, great. That would likely mean the utility would lead or drive that purchasing or procurement and development process, and the site host or the public entity would likely be fairly hands-off, but for some site history and lease agreement type arrangements. With that, I'll just flag that we do have an example here from Marion County on the solar project. I'm going to breeze through that right now, but this is another example where this project went through kind of a utilities procurement process and is being managed accordingly. With that, we'll launch poll question number 7. We are rolling through these poll questions. Thank you for your participation so far. And this is a slightly different approach here. This is a rating scale, not a multiple choice type question. So how comfortable would you be explaining this topic to others? If all of the hosts suddenly decided to abandon this webinar, could you take over? And while you're finishing that out, I will pass this back to Tansy, and I think Tansy will make a few housekeeping notes before we wrap this up and move to just a broader Q&A.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. That was a lot, so thanks for hanging in there. Just a quick preview for one resource that we're going to be coming out with soon. We're working on a map with the largest viable sites, landfill sites in Indiana, so that can inform you as site owners and other folks in the state who's interested in prioritizing these sites for clean energy development. These are not just the largest sites that this resource will include, but this map on the right shows these top 50 sites. So if there's one near you, keep an eye out for this resource when it comes out for more information. We're now going to stop sharing the slides here, and we're going to open it up for a larger round of Q&A. I'll just note, though, that I know it's the top of the hour. If you do have to drop, please, please, please fill out our evaluation survey that we're going to drop in the chat before you head off. Those really help us with planning our future events. But for now,
can I jump in for a second on that? I just want to reinforce that please, we do take those survey results seriously. In fact, this is, I think, the first partnership with state agencies and some other folks in states in Indiana on the Brightfields topic that we've been running. So we really do want your feedback to know, how did this 3-part webinar series work for you? What could we do better next time, whether it's in Indiana or in another state? Because we've started to hear other states express interest, and that would be greatly appreciated for us to know what is best received from you all at your varying stages of knowledge and expertise.
All right, at this point, we actually have our speakers from all 3 webinar series sessions up on the screen right now. And so I'd like to now open it up for Q&A from the group. To start things off, one question I got privately during the webinar is, this is kind of going back to, well, thinking about how a community might start thinking about how to structure these deal structures. How might a community begin to figure out what type of deal structure would work for the site and identify the right stakeholders to bring in? So I'm going to maybe direct this question to Matthew and Bill with IU. I know you work navigating the different entities in the state. So yeah, how might a community begin to figure out what deal structure is right for their site?
Bill, do you want to start? I was just talking for a while.
Sure. I think what ERI got involved in through our Indiana Resilience Funding Hub was talking to communities about grant funding for their projects. And a project we kept running into was how might we convert our landfill into a solar field? And I think there was a lot of questions about how that process works. Where do you start? Who do you have to get in the room? And I think that's where we can help communities. We also work for free. And if you just don't know where to start, but you have a landfill or a brownfield that you think would be a good candidate, we're happy to wade into that and have an initial conversation with you and expose you to some resources. And then if it looks appropriate, then we can connect you to this larger group of resources and give you some tips and pointers about how you might proceed.
Yeah, I'll just add that, we're happy to be a sounding board as well, depending on the type of project you're pursuing, right? It would be kind of fundamentally different if you're looking at a behind the meter project to connect to like your wastewater treatment plant versus if you were trying to offer your site to the market or to a potential economic partner or utility partner. The types of stakeholders you'd bring in would be vastly different there. So we're happy to help. Obviously, Bill and his team know the Indiana players better than we do. Fortunately, we're grateful to have, John and the Indy Brownfields and IDEM as part of this webinar series too, so that you know that they're aware of these different types of projects and some of the various pros, cons, and everything in between of how this can work.
Awesome.
I might add that when Jacob finishes his map, we'd like to work in the other direction as well and say, hey, did you know you have this brownfield in your neighborhood that may have a new life?
Yeah, great. All right. Another question that I got in advance, if a community in Indiana wants to explore reusing their landfill for a solar project, but they don't know the condition of the landfill, where should they start? John, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. They can definitely reach out to us. We can talk a little bit on a preliminary basis of the size and the condition of the landfill, and really that nature of current structure. We work quite a bit with IDEM and Kim Vetter. I know on our second webinar we talked about the compliance assistance site visit. That might be something that would be beneficial just to evaluate the solid waste and what type of requirements we would need to protect human health, the environment, to get the site viable and ready for a reuse for solar. Sometimes we might have some assistance, whether that be helping with the phase one, maybe helping a little bit with phase two. Our funding, kind of goes up and down. Right now, we're kind of obligated with our phase two work, but we should be getting additional funds to assist projects. Typically, what we tend to do is look at the thickness of the cap. We may go around and evaluate what's emanating off the landfill into the surrounding environment, evaluating if there's leachate concerns. Those are the things we might be able to help fund. Liability is a big thing, though. If we're working with a potential purchaser or a prior municipality that may have trash that they've irresponsibly placed in this landfill, we may have limitations on that, and that's where I would recommend you talk to an environmental attorney. We might be able to help with a comfort letter, but we might not be able to, depending on if you are responsible for putting trash into the facility. So start with us. We'd be happy to work with you in trying to figure out a path forward, getting you connected with IDEM for them to do the site visit. It's like we said in the second webinar, a very collaborative approach we're taking on, just trying to holistically look at the site and determine what really would be the next steps and ensuring that we can get this off the ground and make a successful project.
Awesome. Anything to add? I know Kim is on the call.
She's shaking her head yes. So do you have anything to add?
They're in the same room.
We are in the same room, yes.
Hi. Are we getting an echo? Okay.
No, you're all set, Kim. Go ahead.
No, I mean, John's covered most of that. Sometimes we're able to tease out some idea of the shape that it's in based on looking really at the satellite photos, the air photos, historical photos. So those are all online and we can dig through the file. Sometimes we're able to find a few more scraps of files, but they would be so ancient they may not tell you anything on what the condition looks like today. But I will refer back to an earlier call where we discussed the project here in Indianapolis, and the person who represented the ownership for that project did not realize that just knowing where it is, just knowing the location, tells us, oh, it's right next to a river. And there's a stream, right, a tributary right next to it, and it's overgrown. And here's the age. I bet there is, and just from the location and the age, we can make some inferences of things to be aware of that we might suspect are concerns at that facility, because we visited a few or so and seen things that aren't exactly in a file or in a book, but you visit enough places and you go, oh my goodness, like this, they left it here like this in the 70s and walked away and never looked back. So we know more now than we did 5 years ago. I'll get off my
That's good.
soapbox
That's
here.
great. Thanks, Kim. Beth, do you want to add to that? You're muted right now.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I've had the pleasure of walking some landfill properties with Kim. It's been a minute, but on the Ohio River, and she was able to provide really identified as brownfields, abandoned landfills, that type of thing. She was really able to kind of go through the project and provide ideas on what we could, the next steps. And that was very, very important. Of course, Andrea with Indiana Brownfields program was part of that trip too. And I just love the partnership between the two of you in helping the community just through those steps that can seem enormous, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're simpler than what you think. That's all I got.
Awesome. Beth, going back to you real quick, is there any other funding opportunities that weren't mentioned already that we should be considering, or site owners should be considering if they need significant amount of cleanup before they're going to pursue solar?
Well, of course, there are the EPA Brownfields grants.
Yeah.
As long as we can make sure that the project is eligible for those grants, those are great funds. I'm so sorry. I turned this thing off and it's not cooperating. They're very competitive, but that is something that the KSU tab can do, is kind of help work with you on strategies of how you might want to approach that. And there's pretty decent funding, anywhere from 500,000 to over 4 million right now for cleanup grants if you're doing that.
One thing I wouldn't mind mentioning, Tansy, if you don't mind, now with the federal government being back open, the EPA does have a TBA, a Targeted Brownfields Assessment Program, run by Melanie Sorman. Now, they are in the process of having a backlog of particular projects, so it may take maybe 6 months for them to work that through, but they're also a viable option if you're looking for an assessment ability, whether that be phase 1, phase 2, some scoping out of our remedial phases, anything you might be able to do in an assessment grant. Melanie Sorman has a capacity and capability, maybe in a future date, once they get through some of their backlog sites, for that assistance too. And that's not something that I marketed before on any of our prior projects, just the fact that the federal government wasn't viable and open at the time. But this should be coming online, and it's something that I sometimes routinely refer people to, depending on our limitations. So I guess you could start with me, and if that's something that's viable, we could definitely get you connected with Melanie.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thought here. So if you are just building on exactly what John and Beth were sharing, if you are thinking about going down that route and applying for any of those or pursuing those directions, we ran a webinar and workshop actually last fall specifically about kind of best practices for including Brightfield specific elements when we're thinking about that energy reuse aspect, some of the language, some of the way tools available to kind of calculate some of those initial starting assumptions. Obviously, we can help you with that through our partnership with KSU Tab as well. But if you would like to see the slides or the recording from that workshop, that was not Indiana focused specifically, it was national. We are more than happy to share that. That included some template language for sections of like what are the benefits of this? How do you calculate or estimate what the benefits of the reuse might be, even if you're planning for assessment at this time? Because there's a community benefits section, for instance. So there are multiple sections where we can offer some information there to make your lives easier when you're preparing for those applications.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, last comment from Kim, and then we'll round us off.
Yes, so on the topic of financial resources, in solid waste, we have two other sometimes potential ways of obtaining resources or getting someone to help out. If it was a permanent landfill, sometimes the permanent landfills have changed hands and they're now owned by a private individual, or maybe they always did. But if it was a permanent landfill, then it falls under our rule. And the rule says owner, which this whole conversation has been about owner, but it's also about owner, permittee, and operator. Most of the operators have left, but not all. Permittee and operator can be some of the larger companies still around. So it's not a common thing, but there are a few places where we've asked them to come back in and help us with the problem from a long time ago. So that is a rule-based thing. But if you're small county landfill and you owned it, operated it, permitted it, that's not going to help you. The other avenue is the IC13 circular route. If there's a release of a hazardous substance and you have proof that some other entity contributed to that landfill, sometimes we are able to ask that other entity to come to the table. Chances are either they're bankrupt or they've disappeared, but if they are still there, maybe they can go after their insurance from a long time ago. So that is another avenue that is sometimes pursued as well, is these other, I call them the offsite entities.
Thanks, Kim. And we just got a really great question in the chat. Are you aware of any municipalities that have used project-specific TIF, tax increment financing, to fund a Brightfield project? And that is super top of mind for our team. We're actively thinking about how TIF can be used to fund these Brightfield projects. So Matthew, do you have any thoughts on this question? I can see the wheels turning in your head.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And Tansy, great kind of setup here. Funny because I literally just voted on a TIF deal last night in my city. Not Brightfields, but a different economic project. And the use of tax increment financing is intriguing here. I don't know specific Brightfields projects that have leveraged that yet. We're exploring it, particularly as some of the federal incentives are sunsetting. I don't see why it couldn't. I think more likely it would be paired with some kind of other, like an on-site reuse, or kind of paired with an economic development project would be kind of more likely. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be used, because what tax increment financing ultimately does is trying to capture the future. It's effectively projecting the future value of the site once improved or what's built, and applying that into the project to help enable it. So, TIF is really the value of TIF comes from the property tax valuation increase that comes from the project. So, a solar project probably isn't going to increase that as much as like a multi-story apartment building. But that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some revenue that comes from that. So, Lindsay, that's what we're starting to explore, kind of where that value add comes from and at what stage. Happy to take this offline with you if appropriate, and if appreciated, and look at your specific situation.
So a lot of the information that we presented today is in our FAQ, our Brightfields procurement FAQ. So we'll put that link in the chat in just a moment, but you can also scan this QR code to get that in a nice PDF. And our next steps here, the slides and recording will be shared by November 24th. Please fill out that evaluation survey, as we already talked about, and stick around for the last 10 minutes here to ask some site-specific questions or anything else, kind of like what Lindsay mentioned, or any other site-specific questions. And finally, here are all the contact information for all the folks that have been the technical assistance providers throughout this series. And I think those are also on the KSU website. And I'll pass it back off to John to wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks again, Tansy. This has been somewhat of an innovative thing we've not really done before. We're very thankful and appreciative of everyone's time with IU, Rocky Mountain Institute, IDEM, Kansas State University. All of our partners here today have just been wonderful in putting something together, trying to help obviously reuse potential on our landfills, but also trying to diversify our energy needs and seeing if this can work and meld together in one uniform location. So again, I just wanted to highlight again all of our partners and thank you. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're free. We're a free program. We work collaboratively with everyone. We're not a regulatory agency, and we would love to work with all of our stakeholders in the state to figure out if these problems are affecting human health and environment and how we can potentially get them redeveloped into a viable reuse. And solar on Brightfields is just a great connection. So if we don't have the answers or the resources, we'll try to our best to find them for you and get you connected with the right people. So we're thankful for everyone's time today and doing the three-part series, and stay tuned for additional Brightfields opportunities and discussions here for the state of Indiana. I did have a couple other slides here. We don't really need to go through them, but I just was going to highlight some of the other things we've had here. Again, we're free. I like pointing that out to people. We do work routinely with IDEM. We offer our comfort letters, and also we'll have project managers here to help see you through the technical redevelopment and reuse, and ensuring that there's no exposure threats for your reuse. We might have one more slide in here with our contact information and just we do have some funding available. Obviously, it's really dependent upon the needs of your project and what you have. One thing that we didn't really talk about, sometimes we can work with your municipality if it's a wastewater or clean water project. You may be working with our state revolving fund. If you have a brownfields project that triggers Section 319 of the Clean Water Act and it has groundwater contamination, we may be able to get you an interest rate reduction and really free up several $1,000,000 potentially for your project. If you have a very large brownfield that you're looking for solar redevelopment, this might be a good route to go. It's no additional cost to the taxpayers. We just lower that interest rate, and we're able to work and get a site with groundwater contamination cleaned up and potential reuse. So landfills, large landfills, and a larger project might be something that could be a better fit than something that's a little bit smaller. So we're happy to help. And I think our last slide might be our contact information again. So well, I guess our financial incentives. But yeah, there we are. Please let us know. Again, Andrea, this is an old slide. Andrea is retired. In fact, her birthday is today. Happy birthday, Andrea. But Mitchell Smith is the one that's taken over for Andrea, and we'd be happy to get you connected there. So I'm hoping Andrea's on the beach somewhere enjoying her time. I don't think she joined us today, but feel free to reach out to anyone else on this call. We're happy to help. Thank you.
We're at the open office hours portion of this now, right?
Yes, open office hours portion.
So wonderful. So thanks to everyone who joined and stuck around for the almost 90 minutes. If you want to stick around for random GIS usage, please feel free to join us. And if you have questions, obviously continue to do that to stick around. Otherwise, thanks so much and have a wonderful rest of your week.